Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. We all love Homebrew here, right? I mean, it's always fun to take what already exists in the book and add something new and exciting to the world you're trying to create. In fact, I'm gonna offer all of you Den of the Drake fans a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm gonna homebrew a monster right now for all of you to use in your campaigns. Let's go ahead and start with a basic owlbear. It's a classic staple in the D&D bestiary, but we can make it even better. We could start by giving it some armor, and let's make it twice the size of a normal owlbear. You know what, let's give it the ability to smite like a paladin. Let's make it a Sith Lord and give it a lightsaber and have it be best friends with Darth Vader. There's something missing. F it, let's duct tape it to the bottom of an A10 Warthog. So now our owlbear not only has a fly speed, but now it can dispense 30mm American freedom at a rate of 4,200 rounds per minute. Whoa! Now that's how you homebrew a f***ing monster. As awesome as Homebrew can be, I have to admit that sometimes Homebrew can really suck. Not in the, DM, your CR-49 Sith owlbear plane and his best friend Darth Vader TPK'd our party sense, but in the sense that some homebrewers can get a little too wrapped up in their own creations. Today's story revolves around a DM who introduced an entire homebrew game system to his party, and how one inconsequential piece of his precious homebrew caused OP's character to go down in flames. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of R/RPG-Horror-Stories. Enjoy. This story is titled, Reading is Hard. 15 years ago, I was invited to a session DM'd by a friend. It was both a homebrew setting and system. Along with me, there were 3 other players. The DM started by explaining a bit about the setting, which was quite interesting. We didn't get an info dump, just the basic stuff. Now, I don't remember much about the world because it was only a high-level overview. Then we got to character creation. All of the info for the system was written down by hand in some notebooks. The system had very simplistic stats, with one representing all physical prowess, one being responsible for the mind, and one for all magic things. There was also a very extensive skill selection, with hundreds of very detailed skills to choose from. I decided that I wanted to be a scholar, who would know many languages and be well-versed in many of those mind-related things. The DM told us that we didn't have to build towards combat, because going through encounters with RP was also a possibility. After character creation, we started the game. The party entered the city, which was described as a big, sprawling capital of a whole country. The DM mentioned that there was a notification board in the city center. It was cliché, but I decided to take the plot hook and roll with it. I said that I was going towards the city center to read the board and look for a job. The DM told me that it would take 45 minutes to get there. I asked other players to go with me, but they wanted to go do other things, and everyone split to do their own stuff. One went to order food in a nearby tavern, one went to a near store to do some shopping, one started picking up NPCs, stuff like that. I said, I'll get us a job and be right back. While my character was going to the center, the DM started RPing all the interactions with the other players. Everything they did had instant feedback, even if the action should take some time. If you order food, it usually takes time to be prepared, etc., etc. All things that the other players did were pretty mundane. None furthered any plot or found even a single plot hook. They were just enjoying their time doing mundane things, each of them in order, while nothing interesting happened to me. So this may seem obvious, but way too many DMs, including myself, fall into this trap. The golden rule of player engagement is simple but important. Stuff needs to happen. Like, you can't just rely on the strategy of expecting your players to explore your world and find the plot on their own. Let's look at real life, for example. How many of us have found opportunities to save the world just going about our day-to-day lives? I haven't seen any undead armies or dragon cults walking around, so I don't think any of us have. Now, you might get lucky and you'll have a player who likes to instigate things without too much prodding, but that's not always the case. You have to have your world be dynamic in spite of your players. Basically, have the plot hooks come to them. Now, I'm not saying you need to railroad. Please don't railroad your players. But sometimes you need to take the reins and make it a little bit easier for them to interact with what's happening in your world. Like, sometimes you just gotta drop a crisis in their lap and say, hey, what are you gonna do about it? More than 2 hours of real time, my 45-minute wait ended, and I finally reached the board. I said I'm looking for some job offer that'll catch my eye. The DM answered, "You can't read, so you just stare at it." I pointed out how I'm very educated, how I know multiple languages, history, science, math, but apparently there is a skill for an ability to read and write between the hundreds of skills he presented to us, and I didn't take it. The DM checked our characters before play, and he never said anything. Even when I explained my scholar concept. He never said anything 2 hours later, when I told him that my intention was to read the board. He only mentioned it when I already got there. We argued a bit about it. He said that most people in his world cannot read, which should be obvious. Now, I've only played D&D before, which he knew, where you were assumed to know how to read if you knew the given language. So it was not that obvious for me. I asked what the point of the notice board in cities was if no one can read them, to which I got no real answer. I asked if I could drop one of my less useful knowledge skills in lieu of reading, since I didn't know that it was a skill and my character for sure wouldn't walk for 45 minutes to read something when they cannot read. My character was supposed to be very intelligent. Sitting with his nose inside of books was one of the 2 sentences in my backstory. It was a no. When the character is done, the character is done. I usually would agree, but this was a homebrew system that I knew nothing about. Now, I didn't fight over it and decided just to roll with it. Okay, so my character asks around to find someone to read the board for them, to which the DM replies, "Sure, it will take you 30 minutes to find such a person." I was surprised that it would take so much time, and asked if there was a library nearby, or a board keeper, or a guard that takes care of the board who would be able to help me read it, but he said no one obviously able to read is nearby, and I have to look for 30 minutes. I agreed because I really had no better idea of how to move the plot forward. I didn't know, in character, if any other players could read. And anyway, I was a 45-minute walk away from them and didn't know their exact location. The DM proceeded to RP with other players' useless stuff. I honestly don't remember much from what the players did here, and I started zoning out since there was almost no involvement of my character. After another 2 hours of real-life time, it was my turn again. "You found a noble that can read passing by," said the DM. I RP, asking the noble very nicely to help me, using the most eloquent and well-behaved way of speech. Without any rolls, the DM just says, "Oh, the noble won't speak to you, peasant," and goes away. Oh. I was a scholar, and I dressed quite well. But apparently I was a total peasant anyway. And so I decided to take another approach. I decided to look for the newest looking posts from the board, and decided to look for a library, university, or another such building where I should be able to find other non-nobles who can read, and ask them to read quests for me so we could finally start to do something constructive. Another 30-minute search awaited me. So 2 more hours of real life later, I am stopped by 2 guards. They tell me I was seen stealing notices from the notice board, and I am under arrest. I attempt to explain to them that I only borrowed the cards in order to get them read, and I intended to post them back. They had none of it. There were no rolls to persuade or anything, and they approached me to arrest me, so I decided to run away. My physical score was pretty low since all of it went into my mind, so there were not even any rolls for my attempt to run away. I got knocked out easily. We then cut back to the other players, who RP for most of the rest of the session. Some 90 minutes later of real-life time, I wake up in a cell. I will be in court for 2 days, where they will probably decide my hand will be cut off for the crime of thievery. It was the end of the session, and I never went back to another. I assume my character lost their hand for taking a few pieces of paper, because he was smart. But apparently not smart enough to know anything about the laws or culture of this homebrew land. TLDR, I looked for a plot, went to jail, and lost my hand. All because I couldn't read while being a scholar. End of story. So being perfectly honest, I was at first a little bit suspect of OP, since they were referring to the other players' activities as useless, which is usually a pretty good sign of an inconsiderate that guy. But then I kept reading. This poor man spent close to nearly 6 hours doing nothing. If you're gonna make your game anything, whether it be edgy, cringy, or both, never make it boring. I mean, hell, I'll play in a game populated by nothing but DMPCs, long before I'll play in a game where I spend 6 hours doing nothing. Every minute that passes is 1 minute closer to the heat death of the universe. Don't waste what precious little time you have tolerating boring homebrew. Now, before we go, let's take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art is done by longtime viewer and artist Skyrogue, who has submitted 2 new paintings to be displayed in the gallery. The first is me, flying with my rightfully earned YouTube play button. Ignore the crab, I don't know who he is, stop asking. The second painting captures an awkward moment at the Drake family reunion, where I am forced to explain the value of hoarding cringe to my Uncle Monty. Look, Drake, I know that losing your father at a young age was hard, but you need to stop embarrassing the family with this hoarding cringe stuff. Look, Monty, can we just not talk about this right now? Why couldn't you just terrorize the countryside like your cousin Michael here?
Haha, I hoard gold real good.
Thank you again, Skyrogue, for submitting your fan art. If you want to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. I love receiving and reviewing fan art, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and end the video. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.